Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, 4 Steps to Standardize Database Development for DevOps Success, brought to you by Redgate. I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Kathi Kellenberger. Kathi is the editor of Simple Talk at Redgate and a data platform MVP. She has worked with SQL Server for over 20 years and has authored, co-authored, or tech edited over a dozen technical books. Kathi is the co-leader of the past Women in Technology virtual group and a volunteer at LaunchCode. When Kathi isn't working, she enjoys spending time with family and friends, cycling, singing, and climbing the stairs of tall buildings. Be sure to check out her courses on Pluralsight.
So today I'm going to talk to you about the 4 key steps towards standardization and how that can help with DevOps. So first we'll talk a little bit about Redgate and the shifting IT landscape, how that's really challenging development in companies, how things are changing, and it's just making things a little more difficult. The importance of database in DevOps. So the database is often left out of DevOps for a lot of reasons, and we'll talk quite a bit about that. I'll go over those 4 key steps and why standardization helps, and then finally I'll demo a couple of our products that can help you achieve these 4 steps. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Redgate. Redgate's been around for 19 years, and Redgate is really special to me, not just because I worked there, but back when I was first a database administrator years ago, I relied on SQL Server Central for getting me through my day and helping me learn things. And Redgate owns SQL Server Central and also Simple Talk. And now I'm the Simple Talk editor, so it's kind of come full circle to me. I'm also really proud of the fact that Redgate is so involved in the data platform community. We sponsor lots of user group meetings and events like SQL Saturday and Past Summit. So I'm really proud of what we've done. Another thing I want to really point out is that not only do we have products for DevOps, we also practice what we preach. So last year, we had almost 1,300 product releases. That's major and minor product releases. And that number is increasing every year. So we are also getting better at DevOps. And it's throughout the whole company. Even as an editor, I use DevOps practices in my job. So one of the things that is really challenging for IT teams in order to deliver software quickly is a shifting IT landscape. And so there's a lot of pressure to deliver changes, new features very, very quickly. So you have to think about how are we going to be consistent and maintain quality? How are we going to make sure that the systems are stable with all those changes coming out and reduce the risk of data breaches? So the other thing that makes it even more difficult is including the database in this. In a lot of places, that database changes are perceived as a bottleneck because we can't just replace the database when we roll things out. You know, IT teams are actually changing quite a bit as well. I work for a company, Redgate, and my team is based out of Cambridge in the UK. I'm sitting in my home office in Illinois in the US. This is not abnormal. IT teams are often spread globally. You have differences in time zones, you have differences in languages, culture. So it's really difficult to get everybody kind of communicating and working in the same way. And the one way you can help take care of issues like this is really standardizing making sure everybody is using the same coding standards, using the same tools, and that makes it easier for managers to bring new members of the team. If everybody's working the same way, it's a lot easier to have, a new member come in and replace someone and just be able to hit the ground running a lot quicker. Tech landscape is expanding. I think that the landscape of tech, we've never seen it stand still. Change is always happening. And companies are in the process of removing a lot of outdated architecture in on-premises data centers. So it's always so expensive to buy hardware, keep hardware up to date. A lot of places will rent hardware because there is such a fast turnover, but there's also a lot of old stuff sitting around. And companies are really moving toward the cloud. In fact, Redgate has a survey that we put out each year, and our last one, the 2019 State of Database DevOps reports, the people that responded to the survey said that 50% of them are actually have server estates now in the cloud. So maybe that's partway in the cloud or in a hybrid approach or completely in the cloud. So things are really, really changing. And teams have to have new skills. We have to think of things in another way. Regulatory pressure. So for example, last year, the GDPR went into effect. In the US, not companies, but states are looking at have their own regulations based on GDPR. And of course, we have things like HIPAA and SOX. So there's all these regulations that we have to deal with. And of course, the threat of data breaches. How does a week go by that you don't hear about another data breach? And what's really interesting is that a company called Stripe in Paris, they had a poll last year and they surveyed C-level executives. The report's called the developer coefficient. And the interesting thing is that these C-level executives saw data breaches and also keeping up with regulatory compliance, saw both of them as threats to the business, the bottom line. So to me, that's just really ironic. Redgate, in our State of Database DevOps report, showed that 65% of data in dev and test environments is just a copy of productions. That's really scary. Now, I know in my own experience, when I've been a developer, I've been a developer sometimes as a consultant for like ETL or business intelligence. Was given a copy of a database. I have no idea if it was the data was sanitized or not. They said, here, this is what you work with. I say okay and restore it on my local SQL server. So that is a really that's a really bad thing from the point of complying with these regulations, as well as a risk for a breach. Everybody's expected to do more with less. I don't hear of anybody's budgets increasing. Everybody's budgets are decreasing. And the bad thing in IT is that, IT, we're expected to bring value to the customer. We are really helping out the company's bottom line. However, we're often seen as a cost center. Okay, the things we need, the staff we need, those are seen as cost centers instead of being a way to bring value to the firm. And when you aren't, investing in IT, then you have people that are spending more time putting out fires than bringing innovation to the company. Worrying about fixes and all the tedious rework, things like that, instead of being proactive and bringing new features and new innovation to the company. The other big problem is that database development is really lagging behind DevOps. The database is complex. You can't just pick it up and replace it because there's data there, right? And if any things that are rolled out that you've got to roll back, that's really problematic and really difficult. Our state of database DevOps found that, for example, 83% of the companies that responded have version control for their application code. I that even seems kind of low to me. I almost think that most shops have some kind of version control for their application code. The scary thing is only 55% have it for database code. It's even worse with automated testing. 49% have automated testing for their application code, but only 19% for database code. So that basically means everything for testing the database changes, it's all manual. A script is getting handed to a DBA. Like how do might be hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. Then those database changes really become the bottleneck for the whole process. So Donovan Brown is the principal DevOps manager for Microsoft, and he's really considered one of the premier experts in DevOps probably throughout the world. He says that the time to debate whether you should or should not implement DevOps is over. You either implement DevOps or you lose. Because I'm just going to put my little words here. Other companies are innovating, and if you're not innovating as fast as they are, you're going to lose customers. He also says, you've got to implement DevOps, and that includes the database too. So DevOps is really seen as the ultimate nirvana. Everything's automated, and it's not just a switch that you flip. It's not a product that you buy. It's not, someone from higher up saying, we're going to do DevOps next week. No, it's really a culture transformation. And, it's a way that these silos are broken down. Different teams talk to each other, and things are automated. Like I mentioned back at the beginning, even in my own job as an editor, when I first took the job, there was so many emails back and forth just to get one article published. And I'm not talking with the author. I'm just talking with the lady that helps me at Redgate to get these articles published. There was, 4 or 5 emails for every article, and it was just really problematic, and she didn't know what was going on. And so we invested in a couple of tools, and now it's just seamless. We talk to each other when we feel like it. Now we don't have all these emails back and forth. So really that's what you want to achieve, automating the processes, not discussion over these things that you repeat over and over. It's really a journey, and it starts with a team, or maybe it starts with somebody higher up saying we're going to do this, but you can't really do it all at once. When you think about the database, how do we do this? How do we really get the database into that pipeline? Maybe the application is in this pipeline, this DevOps pipeline, and everything's automated and everything works seamlessly, but how do we get the database into that? Part of it is a culture change, where the way we think of database development and database administration, we start thinking of it a different way, not just stability of the system, but also to accept changes to help the innovation. We all need to have a common goal. And part of the way that you can do that with the database is by using the right tools. Instead of having hundreds of lines of code to look at, you can have automated testing. Source control, as I mentioned, very few shops have source control, version control for their databases. So some of these first steps can go a long way to getting into that pipeline, but it's not going to be overnight. So here are the 4 key steps. First of all, introducing coding standards. This is really important, especially for those geographic dispersed teams, finding code smells, etc. Adopting version control, and I'm talking about at the database level. Introducing dedicated development environments. I'll talk more about, why this is really important, why every developer needs their own copy, and why it really should be sanitized data, and also adopting unit testing for the database, automating that. So for coding standards, we're talking about naming. Everybody across teams should be naming, for example, stored procedures in the same way, indexes in the same way. There's a lot of coding practices that you can enforce, and there are tools like SQL prompt and also our SQL change automation that can help enforce those. Hopefully, we're doing that at the left, at the development area, so those code smells, those bad practices aren't ending up in production when we find them. So we want to have as much to the left, to the beginning, as we can. There's also static code analysis to catch problems if they get along, for example, to the build process, and tools like SQL change automation allow you to run a group of rules against the code. Hopefully, the developers are using SQL prompt at the beginning, and you have enabled the rules that are important to your shop and disabled the ones you don't care about. So those problems, those code smells are caught earlier, but even at the build process where we're closer to production, we can catch them again. So it's really important, for code reviews, catching problems early, and the tools can help you with that. Version control. I've mentioned version control several times. If you think about stored procedures, and I'm just going to go by things I've seen in lots of different places where I've been a consultant. I'm going to call it the old way of doing source control for database objects. For example, stored procedures. I'll see stored procedures, and there's a lot of commented out code all over the place, and some code that runs. Well, what's happened as changes have happened over time, because they were afraid they would lose something, they'd go ahead and comment out the old and add the new. Well, when you're trying to troubleshoot something, that just really causes a lot of problems. Another thing that I've seen and heard is that, oh, we don't have to worry about making this change to the stored procedure because we got these backups over here, and we could easily just restore a backup on another server and grab that old code. Well, if we have everything, the database included in source control, that solves a lot of these problems. We can easily roll back, get earlier versions, and auditing. You may have regulations that say you can't do things like that. You have to be able to bring up earlier versions and who made the changes, for views or whatever. And this is really the first step on getting that, maybe the second step, because the first step was adopting coding standards, but this is really a big step, I'll say, in getting that database into the pipeline, not having this separate process for database. This is really a big step in order to keep the database and application changes in sync, because what happens if we're rolling out these code changes and that new table or those stored procedure changes are not going along with it? We're going to break the application, right? So this is really, really an important step. And even if you're not adopting, if you're not really even at the stages where you're starting to practice DevOps, this is a really important thing to do anyway. For the reasons I talked about, there's comments all over the place, and getting back to how things looked before. Here's another important thing, introducing dedicated development environments. And what this really means is that each developer will have a copy of the database to work with. This should resemble production. I say resemble, it should be, there's a lot of ways to do it, but probably the best way is if it's just like a production, but any personal data is masked. And the reason that each developer should have their own copy is that so that they can keep track of their changes and push their changes out and not step on each other's changes. And then these changes then are deployed right from that database into the source control, into the pipeline, into the continuous integrated environment. So how do you do this? You might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, our production database is a couple of terabytes. How in the world will we do that? And I'll show you when I do the demo a tool from Redgate that makes this really easy. Lets you save space. As I've worked at places where they've given me copies of databases and I didn't even have room on the workstations to have all the databases I need to work with at the same time, and then you also if you have, let's say you have a development server and a database for each developer, you've got to do all those restores, and that takes so much time. So I'll show you a tool called SQL Provision that can really help in this area. Allow each developer to have their own copy, automate sanitizing the data, and also allowing it to be very fast and not take up much room. It's really, really cool. So you'll see it in just a few minutes. And finally, the fourth step is adopting unit testing for the database. So if you don't have unit testing, it's very easy for bad code smells to find their way into production. And once these problems make it into production, it's really hard to change things. Things are much more expensive to change once they make it there. So if we can have testing, automated testing very early, and it's a new way of thinking, I think, for database administrators. Often they're in the traditional way, they're often just handed a script that somebody's cobbled together with a bunch of changes, and they've got to vet that. I mean, that's very time consuming, and it's really error prone. Problems could slip in. If you have unit testing, and this process is automated, yeah, occasionally the database administrator is going to have to manually vet something, but those things are going to be much smaller, and you'll be able to automate a lot of the testing. So once you get to that build process, everything's integrated together, and you'll be assured that things will work once they hit production. So this is a diagram that shows a complete workflow for compliant database DevOps. You're not going to have to do this all at once, but if you can take a couple of steps, you'll be well on your way. Probably source control, the standards, standard coding practices, and source control are really the two biggest steps. It's going to make the rest of it much easier. So if I start, let me start here. If we have a backup, of course, we're always going to be backing up our databases, but we're able to use that to provision and mask a copy of that for each developer. So each one will be able to work with their own copy. They'll be able to use source control against those copies and apply unit testing, everything will be integrated. We can also use this to set up environments for QA, staging, build server, etc. And the idea here is that eventually everything is automated, everything's just a part of the standards that you're already using for DevOps. It's that nirvana we want to achieve here. The other thing that I don't think I mentioned when I was talking about source control is that it's real easy to apply a fix at production to, say, oh, we need this new view, or we need to make this little tweak on a stored procedure, and just go ahead and apply it to production. But you really need to get away from doing that. Once you have this pipeline in place, everything really should go through that pipeline. And the reason is that if you don't, you run the risk of having something pass testing in QA and build properly, but all of a sudden you're not in sync with production. So that could be a risk of something failing once it hits production. So you've got to be really, really careful about that. So you can go out to Redgate's site and find out more about our tools. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of the tools and just give a short demo, and then after that, we'll open it up for questions. So I am going to switch over to SQL Server Management Studio first, and I have a couple of environments, set up. I'm doing everything on one SQL server. Obviously, everything I show you applies to multiple SQL servers in your enterprise. So this is my production SQL server. I'm going to be working with this masking test database and AdventureWorks. And I also have a development server. This one doesn't have any databases on it yet. So I'm going to set up an environment so that each developer can work with their own copy. Okay, so SQL Provision, the product I really would like to show to you today, this solves a lot of problems. It solves space issues, time issues, and data masking. So it's pretty cool. It has two components to it. The first one is called Data Masker. I have to admit there is some work here. This is something that you're going to have an intern or a junior person working on, because it is quite a bit of work. But I am going to show you a little bit about how it works. So first of all, let me jump over to this masking test, and I have one table in here called people, and it's just a copy of some of the AdventureWorks data. So if you've seen AdventureWorks demos before, you probably recognize some of these names. Okay, so what I want to do is create a masking set that changes the names and also changes the email address. Okay, so I've got one, and I can make sure of where I'm pointing. I'm going to point to, let me go here and change this to a copy. I'm probably not going to create this masking set against production because I'm going to want to test it as I go. So I'm going to go against a copy, and you can see we've got the same data there. The controller, that's where you set up where you are working. But you don't have to worry about that whenever we're down the road when we're working against production, when we're making what we're going to call clones. We don't have to worry about that. It will work. Okay, so here's the rule I've got in place, a substitution rule. So what I'm doing is substituting the middle name first name, middle name, and last name. The interesting thing here is there are some free products out there that just let you kind of swap places, kind of scramble names like that. But this tool is much more robust. We have a lot more to offer here. For example, we supply all these data sets, these random data sets. And for example, we've got names from different, like female and male names, different countries, etc. So I can come in here, choose the different columns that I'm interested in, and then choose a data set. And if there's something that doesn't quite fit what you want to do, you can create your own data sets as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this up. Other thing that I want to do, I'm going to grab this substitution rule and I'm going to drop it on the trigger manager. So this disables triggers and then re-enables triggers after we're done, because we don't really want all these triggers firing while we're working. So by doing that, we'll wait till that's done before this starts. And this is a multi-threaded application, so it will actually try to do things the most efficient way and run multiple things at once if we let it. So what I'm going to do is create a new rule to take care of these email addresses. If I click new rule, you'll see we've got a lot of different types of rules here. And if there's something you can't figure out how to do, our sales engineers know how to do some other things inside here, taking advantage of some of these rules, some little extra steps that you might have to do. They're really great at this. I'm going to go ahead and click new rule, internal sync rule. So what I would like to do is create an email address based on the existing name. Okay, so I am not going to try to figure out how to do that. I am just going to copy and paste here. Basically, this is a SQL statement. You know, we're going to append last name to first name with a period, with at, and then I'm going to use a parameter pointing to one of these data sets to come up with the business name. So I'm just going to paste that in, and then I'm going to look for a data set. I'm going to go down to text, just dictionary words. So hopefully you can see that okay. Whoops, there we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and create the rule. And oops, I'm not done. I forgot to tell it which column I cared about, the email address column. Okay, hopefully I didn't figure anything else yet. I want to save this, but I don't want to add another one, so I'm going to say no. And again, I'm going to drop this onto the substitution rule, because that substitution rule has to run before my internal rule. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and run this, and it's going to run against my copy. Should not take, and it warns me, are you sure you really want to do this? Yes, I really want to. It should not take very long to do it. And if there's any errors, it'll let you know. So, you know, it's like anything else you're developing. You're going to have to test, and, you know, it's kind of an iterative process. And I am going to save the set and close that out. All right, so now when I run the same query again, did I not run it? I know I ran it. That's not good. Well, let me open that back up again. Things can run perfectly a dozen times, but when you're doing it live, that's when things fail. Never fails. Whoops, let's get rid of that. Okay, there's data masker. And I'm going to try that again. Let me try this copy, because I know that one was working yesterday. Nope, that was not the one I want, because that one doesn't have the email change. Okay. Okay, I am gonna try, let me double check to make sure it's pointing to the right place. Masking type copy and run the masking set. Try that again. If it doesn't work this time, I am moving on. The demo gods are not smiling on me today. Did not work. Okay, I promise you that it does work. I must be doing something wrong. What I'm going to do is move on to SQL provision. And SQL provision, SQL clone, the piece of the cloning piece of the SQL provision product. So this is the dashboard, and you can do things manually if you would like, or you can script everything. So obviously for automation, you're going to want to script anything. I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to do it manually first. So the first thing you've got to do is create an image. You can use a backup, which we really recommend, or you can point directly to a SQL server. I'm wondering if I had the wrong name or something on that restore. Okay, let me go back. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a SQL server for this. I have to tell it where to find the database name. I'm going to use masking test and continue. Here I can go ahead and drag. I'm going to go ahead and try it just to see if it will work this way. I'm not going to promise because I really feel like I have done something wrong. Let's grab that. So I can just grab that and pull it in. And I can apply other scripts if I would like at this point. I'm going to click continue. Typically, you're going to save this out on a network path so that developers can grab their copies. They're not going to grab a copy of the image. They're going to grab something called a clone, which is much smaller. The image is going to be about the same size as your database, the original database. I'm just going to call this masking test 1 and create the image. This is a really small database, so it should be pretty quick. It's going to take longer for larger databases. So it's kind of like a backup. And hopefully it will be done pretty quickly. I'm not going to do anything else on here, but the cool thing about this is then we can create clones from it that only take up a really small amount of space, like about 45 megabytes each. There we go. We've got our image, and now I'm going to create a clone. I can select the images. So this is what a developer might do. This is the self-service area, and you can set up security to control who can do what, and that's based on groups. I'll click next. I'm going to skip modifications. You might do something like change users, things like that. And I'm going to create the clone out on dev. Click next and give it a name. I'm just going to call it masking test clone. Give it whatever name you want, and it'll be really quick. It'll be just as fast. Of course, I'm not going across the network, but it'll be just as fast whether you're creating one clone or you need to create 100 clones. If you have 100 developers, most places probably don't, but each clone will just take a few seconds, at least under a minute. Of course, there's things I can't control, like the speed of your network and things like that. Go back out to SQL Server, and I'm going to refresh here, and there is my masking test clone along with my data. I'm just going to go check and see if it just by chance did mask this time. It did. So something I did wrong when I was working in the masking tool, but you can see that it did mask the data and my email addresses do look correct. So that's good. Another thing that's pretty interesting here is that this is not some kind of a read-only copy. This is, you're able to do things like, for example, hook it up to source control. So I'm just going to show you that we can do that. I'm going to hook this up to Git. And I have a folder set up, masking test. So it says it's not a Git repository. So it should be, here we go. That one will work. There we go. So I can hook this up to my source control and, push my changes up, be a part of that entire pipeline with this clone. So that's, really, really cool. Let me go ahead and just show you a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I can go ahead and push those changes up. And, I can, oops, can't do anything till that guy's done, but I can create objects, I can change data, and let's see, I could come in here and say, for example, create table test, call one int, and make whatever changes I need to in this database. Okay, so then I could push that change up. So that's all I wanted to show you there. So the other thing you might be thinking about is, does this work on larger databases and can I automate this? So yes, so I'm going to bring up a PowerShell script. We have all the commandlets that you need. What I did here is I created a little function that I can reuse. Now, I'm showing you the code here, but I could have easily saved this function in my PowerShell repository. But I wanted to make this easy for me. So basically what I'm doing is I have a list of developer names. I tell it where, where my clone server is, and say where I would like the clones to end up, and the image name and the clone prefix. I'm just going to go ahead and run this, but I'm going to bring up this as well. There we go. And so I'm going to run this, so we'll be able to see the status as we go. We started creating Grant's, now we're creating Kendra's, now we're creating Steve's, and now we're creating Kathy's. So that was very, very fast. It took 13 seconds to create all those clones. Of course, I'm not across the network, but here's another cool thing. Let's see, I just got to refresh here. And now I've got all those databases. So now every developer has their own copy that they can make changes to. And as far as SQL is concerned, it's any other database. If I go and look at the properties, I will see that SQL Server thinks that this is over a 3 gig database. Hopefully you can see that, okay? But if I go out and, let's see, go right to where the data is, all the data files are stored here. It's on my C drive and program files because I'm just working on a local workstation. But if I right click on these clones and look at the properties, it's a total of 220 megabytes total for all those clones I created. Even though each one of those AdventureWorks ones should be over 3 gigabytes. And the reason it's like that is because each one of these the data is actually in that image, that one image that I created. And we're just pointing to it with the mount point. And the data that is local is just stored in this disk. So I think that that is everything that I wanted to show today. So we're ready for questions, if there are any.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We do have a question that
Welcome.
has come in. And audience,
Okay.
if you have any more questions, please ask them in the questions panel. The questions that we currently have is, if every developer has their own copy of production, how do
Mhm.
you make sure that everyone is working on a copy with the most recent changes from their coworkers' work? Is that made possible with the source control piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't go through a whole demo of source control, but let's say that Grant creates a new table and he pushes that change up to the repository. So when I'm working, I can go out and grab the latest changes. So as long as I'm using source control and we're, pushing out to that repository, we can get those changes back. So yeah, absolutely can do that.
Great. Well, that is actually the only question that we have. So,
Okay.
Kathy, is there anything you would like to add?
I just encourage everybody to go out and just download free trials of our products just to see how they work. And, you know, um, we at Redgate, we try to make everything as simple as possible and easy to learn. And we have some really great people like Kendra Little and Grant Fritchie who are constantly, like every week, they have videos on how to use our products and other topics about DevOps and database administration. So we've got a lot of educational material out there, lots of articles. So I really invite you to come out and look at our website, look at some of the content we have out there. And but otherwise, I just really thank all of you for attending today. It's been really fun for me. Sorry about the one little glitch, but obviously I did something wrong somewhere. And just check us out. Check Redgate out. We've got a lot to offer, and I've been with Redgate for a couple of years, and it's just the most fun, best company I've ever worked for. And we really care about all of you guys out there, and we're always looking for your feedback.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And we actually did have a few more questions come in while you were
Okay.
saying that. The next question that we have is, are these tools only for SQL Server?
Fantastic question. The we are, and I'm not keeping up with the Oracle side. So we are uh, creating tools on the Oracle side. We do have some out there. Our goal is to have parity with our SQL Server tools. So that is the one of the big things we're working on right now is having parity with Oracle tools and SQL Server. Um, I don't know exactly how that's all going to look in the future, but I hope that it's just all seamless. That's my vision. I don't know if it's Redgate's vision or not, but those are we like to make things simple. We like to make things intuitive. So, I could see something like that happening. Don't hold me to it, but we are definitely working on tools for other platforms, and Oracle is one we're really putting a lot of work into right now.
Awesome. And the last question that we currently have is, do you have training videos on your website?
Yes. So if you go to redgate.com / I think it's hub, or just click when you go out to Redgate, just click on the hub. We have a thing out there called Redgate University. Redgate University does have videos to teach you how to use our tools, if that's what they're talking about. We have some really great, we have the two Chris's at Redgate that do a lot of those videos. Um, if you look at our Redgate channel out on YouTube, you'll see lots of videos. We talk a lot about DevOps best practices, um, performance, things like that. But we also have a lot of content on learning our tools as well. I'm not really sure what the question referred to. And if you look at Simple Talk and SQL Server Central, we have lots and lots of of informative articles that are just about, database development and things like that that are really not even tied with our tools. We have lots of educational things out there.
Perfect. Well, with that, Kathy, I'd like to thank you for a great presentation today. And I would also like to thank Redgate for providing the audience with a great webinar presentation. And lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.